Pretoria at dusk is a study in fading light and the lingering scent of jacarandas. The branches above the platform have long since shed their theatrical purple, but a suggestion of grandeur remains in the cooling air. You are standing on the platform, and the world feels still. The station hums with the modest confidence of a landmark that has dispatched dignitaries, honeymooners, and over-ironed academics alike since 1923. Arriving early is essential here. Punctuality is not about haste. It is a shared agreement that impatience has no place among polished brass. You look around the station, noticing the way the shadows of the arched roof stretch across the concrete like slow-moving ink. There is a specific quality to the air in Pretoria, a dryness that carries the scent of the high veld, mixed with the aroma of hot dust and electrical grease, a scent standardized somewhere between the transition from empire to republic. Before you stands the blue train. Its deep enamel surfaces catch the last diluted gold of the evening. This shade of blue, often called sapphire, is not meant to be flamboyant. It is composed. It implies a continuity that steel carriages first signaled in 1937, offering a streamlined, hygienic modernity that the older wooden coaches could never quite master. You can still detect the ghost of that unveiling in the panel seams, as though the rivets themselves remain satisfied with their own symmetry. Take a moment to consider the weight of this machine. The carriages rest upon bogies engineered for steadiness rather than speed. Their suspension incorporates helical coil springs, supplemented by swing links designed to dampen lateral sway. It is a mechanical diplomacy, a series of iron negotiations, intended to convince fragile crystal glassware inside that it is not, in fact, traveling at all. You imagine those springs, coiled tight and patient, waiting to shoulder the burden of the 1,000 miles ahead. A porter approaches you with a deliberate calm. His white gloves are a reminder of a quieter, more reverent era. They are impeccably clean, as if they have never known the indignity of a fingerprint. It is rumored, reverently, that at certain formal dinners in the 1920s, a gentleman was expected to change gloves between courses, ensuring that no trace of the soup would offend the entree. This brings us to our first yawn-worthy historical footnote of the evening. Victorian and Edwardian etiquette once insisted that perspiration be treated as a moral failure, rather than a biological necessity. To sweat was to lose one's grip on civilization. You look down at your own hands, and you resist the urge to apologize for simply being alive. You are guided toward the entrance. The steps are covered in a deep, royal blue carpet, and they absorb the sound of your ascent, effectively concealing any unseemly enthusiasm. As you step into the vestibule, the handrail feels cool and metallic, softened by decades of polish. The air shifts immediately. There is a hush here, created by the conspiracy of heavy upholstery and wood paneling, to absorb stray vibrations before they can reach your thoughts. The corridor extends before you in a straight, paternal line. The symmetry is reassuring, suggesting that as long as you stay within these walls, the chaos of the outside world, the Witwatersrand and its dusty mines, cannot reach you. Brass fittings do not sparkle here. They persist. They have been rubbed with beeswax until they glow with a low, internal heat. The thick carpeting suggests that footsteps are entirely optional. You walk, or perhaps you glide, toward the heart of the carriage. A faint scent of pressed linen and old-fashioned protea blossoms hangs in the air, while somewhere deeper in the train, The cautious chime of crystal against crystal rehearses the dinner to come. One can imagine the decades layered here. The Union Limited and the Union Express. Once separate services threading Pretoria and Cape Town, now unified into this singular statement of rolling opulence. There is something dryly amusing about that word, limited. It is as if luxury must apologize for its own abundance, as if it is only allowed to exist within strict, bureaucratic boundaries. This calls to mind another Edwardian manual's warning. One must never recline fully during afternoon tea, lest one appear morally horizontal. You make a silent note to keep your posture at a strictly ethical angle. Through the window, Pretoria settles into the evening with bureaucratic patience. The station lamps flicker on, not with drama, but with efficiency. The shadows of the jacaranda trees lengthen into anonymity as the train's steel flank holds the reflections steady, bending them only slightly along its curved geometry. You become aware of the weight of the carriage beneath you, balanced on its bogies, ready to translate the geological irregularities of the African continent into something resembling courtesy. A steward, moving with the grace of a man who has memorized the rhythm of the rails, gestures toward your suite. The door opens with a muted click, a sound so precise it feels like a period at the end of a long sentence. Inside, the wood paneling is warm, honey-colored, and feels more ceremonial than decorative. The bed is arranged with 100% percale cotton, tucked so tightly that any form of rebellion would require significant paperwork. The lighting is warm and subdued, as if illumination itself has signed a non-disclosure agreement. A small writing desk stands ready for correspondence. That likely won't be sent, given that we now prefer documentation to reflection. You set down your bag. You listen. The train is not yet moving, but there is a preparatory tension in the air, a barely perceptible hum from systems primed for departure. You imagine the steam era, the rhythmic chugging that once preceded this moment, pistons negotiating with gravity in patient syllables. Now, the motion will be smoother, less theatrical, but the memory of steam lingers like an anecdote that refuses to retire. In the dining car, the silverware waits with the quiet ambition of objects that know they will be judged. It was once considered improper to butter bread in a decisive motion. Instead, railway guides suggested fragmenting the act into smaller gestures, as if dairy required philosophical consent. The steward withdraws, and the door closes with a gentle compression of air. You sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress yields without surrendering. The window frames the platform and the jacaranda silhouettes, and you sense that this is more than a departure. It is a rehearsal of departures past. 1923, 1937, and the blue exterior holds steady in your mind as the world begins, very slowly, to drift. You are already in motion, though the movement is so restrained it feels hypothetical, as if the train is reconsidering the idea of travel itself. The platform at Pretoria has thinned into a ribbon of amber light, and the jacaranda silhouettes from a moment ago, those theatrical purple ghosts, now exist only as a smudge against the deepening dark. The corridor outside your suite carries a faint tremor, a reminder of the helical coil springs and swing links we considered earlier. They are performing their quiet diplomacy, a constant, microscopic negotiation between the steel wheel in the imperfect rail. The carriage does not lurch. It does not demand your attention. It simply negotiates. You step out into the corridor. One hand grazes the paneled wall. The wood is cool, polished to a degree that suggests it has been cared for by generations of hands that understood the value of a smooth surface. The carpet, that campaign against noise we mentioned, continues here. Every footfall is absorbed before it can mature into a sound. It is a silent walk toward the heart of the train. The lounge car reveals itself gradually. It does not announce its presence with a flourish. Instead, it unfolds in degrees. First, you see the armchairs, upholstered in a shade of blue that refuses to be anything but dignified. Then, the brass lamps, diffusing light into soft, amber halos. The tables are arranged with symmetrical patience, as if they are waiting for a very important and very slow meeting to begin. A steward glides toward you. He moves with a stability that suggests his shoes are part of the train's own suspension system. He hands you a glass, something effervescent, discreetly celebratory. The bubbles rise with a strange, bureaucratic order. They do not rush to the surface. They ascend in single file, as if following a strict and rather dull protocol. You hold the glass carefully. As you do, you might recall that the suspension system beneath your feet is designed to counteract not only vertical oscillation, but lateral hunting motion. Hunting is that subtle, side-to-side drift that once plagued early high-speed carriages. Before yaw dampers were refined, a train would search for its center, swinging like a pendulum. But here, the modernized bogies incorporate hydraulic dampers calibrated to reduce resonance at cruising speed. This ensures that even a moment of indecision in your own wrist does not translate into a catastrophe for the glassware. The liquid in your glass remains level, a small, golden proof of engineering excellence. You take a seat. The fabric is firm, resistant to collapse, as though it is gently discouraging any form of dramatic lounging. Across from you, another passenger arranges themselves with ceremonial composure. No one speaks loudly. There is a tacit understanding that sound, like emotion, should be portioned responsibly. You think of the Metro Camel air-conditioned carriages introduced in 1939. They were a revelation, a way to seal the interior from the soot and theatrical size of the steam locomotives. Before then, a journey across the Karoo meant a constant battle with dust. Now, the exterior is sealed, and the air you breathe is as composed as the upholstery. The train gathers confidence. The rhythm beneath your shoes grows more legible, a measured percussion that suggests progress without the vulgarity of hurry. Outside the window, the suburban lights of the high veld yield to a broader, more meaningful darkness. The land begins to open incrementally. You sense the faint undulation that precedes the approach to the Mahalisburg Mountains. You do not see them yet. There is only a suggestion, a darker band against the night, a quiet interruption in the horizon's complacency. It is a wall of ancient rock waiting to receive the train. A steward glides past once more, carrying a tray of canapes arranged in geometric obedience. You select one that appears architecturally stable. The flavors are precise, restrained, engineered for a conversation that will never, under any circumstances, escalate. Silverware rests nearby, aligned with such exactitude that you suspect it was measured with a ruler before the guests arrived. In certain 1920s dining protocols, guests were cautioned not to gesture with a fork, lest they inadvertently impale the dignity of their host. You keep your own fork motionless, letting it contemplate its own legacy as a tool of civilization. As the train increases speed, the glass in your hand vibrates almost imperceptibly. It is less a shake and more a suggestion of movement, translated through layers of engineered compliance. Suddenly, the air pressure shifts. You are passing another train, traveling in the opposite direction. There is a soft, cushioned concussion, a muted woof of air that is quickly absorbed by the sealed windows and the disciplined suspension. The hydraulic dampers do their work without applause. You imagine the early decades, when steam locomotives announced themselves with cinders and theatrical groans. Now, you are in a sanctuary. You rise and drift toward the observation window at the end of the carriage. The corridor lights dim slightly as you move, encouraging introspection. Outside, the terrain is becoming less urban and more geological. Low ridges gather on the horizon, their forms ancient and entirely unbothered by our passing. The Mahalisberg range, older than most mountain systems on Earth, waits ahead with indifferent patience. You press your palm lightly against the glass. It is cool. It is unwavering. A fellow passenger remarks on the smoothness of the ride. You nod, resisting the temptation to deliver an unsolicited lecture on yaw dampers. Instead, you offer a neutral observation about craftsmanship. Historically, it was considered improper to compliment the train too enthusiastically in mixed company. 4. Excessive praise might imply dissatisfaction with one's previous conveyances. And so, the compliment passes between you like a polite ghost. The lounge lights reflect faintly in the window, superimposed over the darkening outline of the hills, as the carriage continues its unhurried negotiation with the first folds of the mountains. You are now fully committed to the interior. The mountains are present outside, dim, patient, and geological. But for now, you have chosen the sanctuary of upholstery. The corridor light has been subdued to a diplomatic amber, and the carpet continues its quiet campaign, erasing every trace of your footfalls as you move back toward your suite. Beneath your shoes, you feel the moderated persuasion of the suspension system. The coil springs and hydraulic dampers refuse to let gravity dramatize itself. You recall the earlier conversation in the lounge about smoothness. You resisted the urge to lecture your fellow passengers on yaw dampers then, and you resist it again now, though the technical footnote persists in your mind like an unread manual. Your suite door opens with that familiar, soft compression of air. Inside, the room presents itself as a curated argument against inconvenience. The honeyed wood paneling glows with a restrained polish, as if it has agreed to hold the light, but not to flaunt it. The brass fixtures wait without impatience. On the bed, the 100% percale cotton, still tightly tucked, still diplomatically smooth, has surrendered only slightly to your earlier presence. 1. You run your fingertips along the fabric. It is cool, dry, and faintly starched. The weave is fine enough to suggest discretion, as if even the threads have signed a non-disclosure agreement, promising not to gossip about your fatigue. You sit at the small writing desk. The chair is firm and remarkably upright, gently discouraging any form of emotional sprawl. As the train leans into a long, sweeping curve, you register the redistribution of weight through the bogies. You imagine the primary coil springs compressing in measured increments, but there is something more happening beneath you. An obscure technical fact returns to you. The secondary suspension in these modernized carriages incorporates air bellows, layered precisely above the primary springs. These bellows allow for minute, real-time adjustments to ride height and load distribution. Using automatic leveling valves, the system redistributes air pressure within fractions of a second, compensating for the incline as the train begins to climb. Luxury, you realize, depends entirely on these invisible negotiations with physics. There is a soft knock at the door. Dinner is announced with the solemnity usually reserved for a minor diplomatic event. You adjust your jacket, remembering the historical etiquette that once governed these rails. It was once considered a sign of moral decay for a gentleman to remove his coat in a dining car, regardless of the high-veiled heat. You step back into the corridor, properly layered, and proceed toward the scent of the evening. The air in the dining car carries the faint aroma of roasted Karoo lamb, and something buttery attempting to be subtle. The chandeliers are calibrated to a warm, golden hue, designed to flatter complexions without inciting any unseemly confessions. You are guided to a table set with mathematical precision. The silverware aligns in a descending order of ambition. A folded napkin stands upright, architectural and rigid, as though it is currently aspiring to a career in municipal office. The train's motion continues beneath the ceremony, but the suspension system is doing its best to persuade the table that it is anchored to bedrock. You recall the earlier warning about gesturing with a fork, and you decide to let your cutlery rest in a state of dignified minimalism. The first course arrives. Porcelain meets linen with a muted thud, a sound absorbed by layers of fine fabric and German engineering. The flavors are heritage adjacent, composed, and entirely without nostalgia. You take measured bites, aware of the mountains pressing closer outside. This brings us to another yawn-worthy historical footnote. Historically, diners on the Union Limited were cautioned never to request additional seasoning until the host had first tasted the dish. To reach for the salt too early was to imply a culinary inadequacy on the part of the kitchen. You obediently postpone any interaction with the salt cellar, which waits before you with bureaucratic patience. Across from you, a fellow traveler recounts the lineage of the train. They mention how the blue enamel sheathing, introduced in 1937, signaled a transition from the romantic era of wood to the hygienic era of steel. You nod, chewing slowly, watching the way the crystal on the table trembles, almost imperceptibly. It is a light, ticking note, a response to a subtle irregularity in the rail, which is quickly moderated by dampers that refuse to indulge in resonance. The second course arrives with a choreography of white gloves. It was once considered improper for a lady to pour her own wine in a railway dining car. Such independence was seen as a risk to the choreographed flow of service. You allow the steward to refill your glass with ceremonial calm. The wine tilts, settles, and reflects the chandelier light in perfectly obedient arcs. Between courses, you glance toward the window. The glass reveals only a faint reflection of the interior elegance, layered over the deep black of the night. But as your eyes adjust, you see the mountains have changed. They are no longer distant suggestions. They are immediate. The Magaliesberg Range, older than most mountain systems on this planet, is now a wall of ancient rock absorbing the starlight. The quartzite ridges rise almost within reach of the track, enclosing the train in a stone embrace that predates etiquette manuals and hydraulic dampers alike. 5. As you lean back, feeling the faint recalibration of the air bellows over a subtle incline, the rhythm of the wheels grows more pronounced. It is a steady, mechanical syllable, repeated without flourish. You realize that the train is no longer just traveling across the land. It is negotiating with the spine of the continent. Coffee is served. The aroma is dark, grounded, and practical. Conversation around the car dwindles into contemplative murmurs. Outside, the rock faces gather in layered silhouettes, unpersuaded by the blue enamel or the polished brass. The forward motion feels less like travel now, and more like a continuation, a thread extended through decades of ritual and rivet. You rise from the table, nodding with restrained gratitude to the staff. The corridor receives you again, its carpet still suppressing any evidence of ambition, as you begin your walk back toward the suite, where the immaculately tucked percale cotton and the tightening corridor of stone are waiting for you. You are now drifting deeper into the folds of the Magaliesberg Range. Outside your window, the ancient quartzite ridges are leaning inward, as if to examine this sapphire blue intrusion with geological skepticism. The rock faces are textured with fissures that have endured for 2 billion years, long before the first rail was ever laid, and certainly long before the first gentleman worried about the correct way to butter his bread. Inside the carriage, you sense a shift in the hum beneath your feet. The traction motors are adjusting to the gradient, but the effort remains entirely internalized. It is a polite, sealed performance. However, if you listen closely, you might detect the ghost of a different rhythm. You are traveling in the slipstream of the Union Limited and the Union Express, the standard bearers of steam-powered opulence that first conquered these hills in 1923. Imagine those earlier decades. The Union Limited was the southbound service, a name that always sounded slightly apologetic, as if luxury were a resource that had to be carefully rationed by the state. Its counterpart, the Union Express, carried fortune seekers and mining magnates back toward the gold fields of the Witwatersrand. In those days, the ascent was a theatrical event. The locomotives were mighty old steam steeds, machines that breathed and groaned and announced their intentions with visible plumes of vapor. There were no yaw dampers then. There were no secondary air bellows to maintain your horizontality. Instead, there were wooden coaches that creaked in sympathy with the tracks and the constant, uninvited arrival of coal dust on one's lapels. This brings us to a particularly yawn-worthy historical footnote. Early travelers were advised to carry dust coats, lightweight silk or linen overgarments designed to protect their formal attire from the locomotive's exuberant exhalations. To arrive without a dust coat was to accept a fine, gray patina of progress upon your person. You look at your current jacket, pristine and insulated, and you feel a quiet, heavy gratitude for the invention of the sealed window. You stand and move back toward the observation window. The corridor carpet, that loyal eraser of sound, swallows the echo of your steps. Through the glass, you see the train curving along a shelf carved into the slope. The blue enamel surfaces catch the interior light, tracing a deliberate sapphire arc along the mountainside. You recall the riveted revelation of 1937, when these steel carriages were first introduced. They were heralded as a triumph of hygienic modernity. Steel did not warp like wood. Steel did not harbor the multiplicity of insects that early travelers often complained about in their journals. Steel promised a sanitized, streamlined future. Yet, even now, the rivets themselves seem to hold a memory of the older ways. They are satisfied with their own symmetry, as if they know they are the only thing standing between you and the 2-billion-year-old rock. The train leans into another curve. You feel the moderated redistribution of weight. Beneath you, the primary coil springs are compressing in patient cycles, and the automatic leveling valves are whispering as they adjust the air pressure in the secondary suspension. It is a sequence of microscopic corrections that sustain your composure. Historically, it was considered gauche to discuss the mechanics of one's conveyance in the lounge. Curiosity about pistons and boiler pressure was deemed faintly industrial, a topic for the engine room rather than the drawing room. You resolve to remain silent on the matter of the air bellows, though they continue their anonymous labor, ensuring that the crystal in the dining car remains contemplative. The climb continues. The Magaliesberg Mountains reveal a broader vista now. Layered ridges receding into charcoal gradients, traced by a moon that seems to be keeping pace with the train. There is no plume of steam to annotate the effort. There is only the hum. It is a modern syllable, repeated without flourish. You rest your palm against the wall paneling. You feel the vibration translated through layers of insulation, and it is almost musical. It occurs to you that the train is not just traveling across the land. It is a thread extended through decades of ritual. 1923 optimism, 1937 confidence, 1946 re-emergence. Each era has layered its own silence over these tracks. A steward passes you in the corridor. His nod is a masterpiece of restrained information. He carries a tray of silver service for a late-night tea, and the liquid in the pot remains as level as the horizon. You think of the 1933 dining saloon, the Pro Tea, where they first demonstrated this smooth running quality by filling a glass of water to within 6 millimeters of the brim. After 100 miles of travel at high speed, not a single drop was spilt. Engineering, you realize, is simply the art of preventing a drop from falling. You return to your suite. The door closes with that gentle, familiar compression of air. The bed waits for you, its percale cotton still immaculately tucked. You sit on the edge, listening to the moderated percussion beneath the floor. The mountains are no longer distant silhouettes. They are immediate walls of stone. Through the window, a narrow pass appears ahead, darker than the surrounding slopes. The train approaches it with the same unhurried resolve it has applied to every curve thus far. Coil springs compress. Air bellows recalibrate. The carriage remains level, composed, almost dismissive of the incline's suggestion. You inhale the tempered air of the room, linen and beeswax and regulated calm. The hum beneath you becomes a steady, comforting undertone. The Magaliesberg range has fully enclosed the track, and you are being guided steadily toward the higher contours, into the deeper, gilded silence of the night. The tightening corridor of quartzite is gone. The Magaliesberg ridges, which only moments ago seemed to examine the train with such geological skepticism, have begun to drift apart. They are reconsidering their proximity, receding into layered silhouettes of charcoal and silver, granting the train a narrow, then widening margin of sky. You are higher now, though altitude announces itself only through a subtle recalibration of the air bellows beneath your feet. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere remains unwavering. Climate control preserves a manufactured neutrality, a cool, filtered defiance against the cooling slopes beyond the glass. You stand once more at the observation window, recalling the narrow pass you have just navigated. The percussion of the wheels persists, disciplined, untheatrical, and steady. Engineering is the art of translating irregularity into courtesy. As the track straightens onto the high-felt plateau, the bogies pivot subtly to accommodate the change in terrain. An obscure technical reassurance surfaces in your mind. The secondary air suspension is now working in tandem with elastomeric pads mounted precisely between the bogie frame and the car body. These pads are designed to isolate high-frequency track vibration, reducing transmitted resonance to such a degree that the crystal in the dining car can remain contemplative rather than communicative. You decide it is time for a midnight stroll. The corridor receives you with its customary, carpeted discretion. As you walk, the blue enamel surfaces catch the interior light in subdued arcs, tracing the deliberate geometry of the train. You reach the lounge car. It is nearly empty now, the brass lamps dimmed to a soft, honey-colored glow. You take a seat near the window, watching the land open up. The undulations of the mountains have flattened into a vast, silvered expanse. This is the hinterland, the great interior heart of South Africa, a place where the horizon is less a boundary and more of a suggestion. The hum beneath your shoes feels steadier here on the long straights. You might recall that lateral dampers are specifically tuned to counteract yaw oscillation on these sections of track. Yaw is that faint, serpentine motion that can develop at sustained speeds, a mechanical indecision that once unsettled early steel coaches. But here, the dampers dissipate that energy as heat, ensuring that you are spared the romance of sway. Luxury, as you have come to realize, is often just the subtraction of motion. A steward appears, moving with the white-gloved composure of a man who has memorized the choreography of narrow spaces. He offers you a glass of chilled water. As you take it, you notice that the surface of the liquid is as level as the plateau outside. You think back to the 1933 dining saloon, the Pro Tea, where they famously demonstrated this smooth-running quality by filling a glass to within 6 millimeters of the brim. After 100 miles of travel at high speed, not a single drop was spilt. You take a sip, feeling the cold clarity of the water, and you imagine the decades of engineering, the thousands of microscopic negotiations between steel and rail that allow you to hold this glass with such ease. Through the window, the sky has deepened from a maritime blue to a profound velvet black. The stars of the southern hemisphere appear in scattered punctuation, unbothered by the light pollution of the cities you have left behind. Table Mountain is still hundreds of miles away, but you sense its eventual presence. A flat crown waiting at the end of the line. It is time to return to your suite. You walk back through the corridor, the carpet continuing its campaign against the evidence of your footsteps. You pass the doors of other suites, each one a sealed sanctuary, where other ghosts are drifting toward the Karoo. Historically, it was considered gauche to praise one's own endurance on long journeys. Stoicism was the assumed posture of the elite traveler. You resist the urge to comment on how effortlessly you have adapted to this engineered equilibrium. You are simply part of the train now, a passenger in a palace that refuses to lurch. You open your door. The room is exactly as you left it. The honeyed wood glows in the dark, and the scent of pressed linen and beeswax remains, a constant, reassuring aroma. You sit on the edge of the bed, feeling the moderated percussion beneath the floorboards. You lean back against the pillows. The 100% percale cotton is cool against your skin, and the secondary suspension bellows are whispering to the rails, promising that the night will remain horizontal as you begin your steady progression into the deeper reaches of the interior. The night has reached its maximum density. Outside your window, the great high-veld Plateau has finally relinquished its undulations, yielding to a landscape that refuses even the modest ornament of a hill. You have crossed the invisible threshold into the Karoo, a name derived from the native Khoisan word meaning the land of thirst. It is an honest name. The soil here is pale, almost chalked by a dryness that has persisted for eons, and the vegetation is reduced to isolated clusters of scrub, spaced with a diplomatic distance that suggests they are barely on speaking terms. Inside your suite, the contrast is pedagogical. You stand for a moment by the gold-tiled bathtub. The tiles catch the low light of the room, reflecting a tempered, expensive glow. They gleam with a polished assurance that borders on defiance, a sapphire blue statement of intent suspended above a world of dust. You run your hand along the marble countertop. It is cool, unwavering, and entirely indifferent to the 1,000 square miles of brittle earth passing just inches away. There is an obscure technical reassurance that accompanies this particular hour. The transverse dampers. On these open interior planes, crosswinds can be relentless, sweeping across the flat Karoo with an energy that would, in a lesser machine, cause an unseemly roll. But the modernized bogies beneath you are fitted with dampers mounted diagonally between the bogie frame and the car body. These transverse dampers are specifically calibrated to negotiate with lateral energy, dissipating the pressure of the wind as heat before it can tilt the carriage perceptibly. You are being insulated, not only from the irregularities of the track, but from the very air itself. You decide it is time to test the plumbing. You run the water. It arcs into the basin with an obedient clarity, a liquid luxury that seems almost scandalous in this land of thirst. This brings us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote: the etiquette of arid extraction. In the early 1920s, it was considered a minor breach of character to request additional water for washing while traversing the Karoo one. To do so was to imply a certain ignorance of the landscape's scarcity, a lack of empathy for the dry earth. One was expected to perform one's ablutions with a stoic and rather minimal volume of fluid. You, however, watch the tub fill, acknowledging that morality has loosened considerably since the era of the Union Limited, and you sink into the warmth. The carriage continues its moderated advance. As you recline, you sense only a faint, rhythmic translation of motion through the water's surface. The vertical hydraulic dampers are working in parallel with the secondary air suspension, mitigating high-frequency bounce induced by minor rail imperfections. You are spared the indignity of ripples. The water remains placid, a small, private lake, traveling at 90 kilometers per hour. You imagine the early travelers of the 1890s, fortune seekers and magnates who crossed this same stretch of earth in wooden coaches. For them, the Karoo was an experience of tedious discomfort. There was the constant intrusion of coal dust, the multiplicity of insects, and the sheer physical weight of the heat. They traveled with dust coats and low expectations. Now, you are in a sanctuary where the air is filtered, the linen is cool, and the only reminder of the desert is the pale, moonlit geometry beyond the glass. You stand, the air in the suite feeling marginally cooler against your warmed skin. You dry yourself with unhurried deliberation, feeling the dense, monogrammed weave of the towel. Historically, it was once advised that one should never discuss the temperature of one's bath in polite company, as comfort was considered a private and perhaps unearned indulgence. You keep your satisfaction to yourself, adhering to the code of the refined ghost. You return to the bed. The 100% percale cotton is waiting for you, still crisp, still carrying the faint scent of beeswax and pressed linen. You sit on the edge, listening. The hum beneath the floorboards is a steady, comforting undertone, neither rising nor falling. It is a modern syllable, repeated without flourish, the sound of systems operating at peak efficiency. Through the window, a solitary farm fence parallels the track for a brief moment, its wire tracing a silver line under the stars before veering away into the void. You think of the millions of sleepers who have preceded you on these rails, each one a passenger in a palace that refuses to lurch. 1923, 1937, 1946.3. Each era has contributed its own layer of silence to this journey. You lean back against the pillows. The secondary suspension air bellows are whispering to the Karoo dust, promising that your horizontality will be preserved, regardless of the gradient. The transverse dampers are holding the crosswinds at bay, and the primary coil springs are absorbing the microscopic irregularities of the desert rail. You are no longer just a traveler. You are an integrated component of the machine, a ghost in a blue enamel shell, drifting steadily through the land of thirst. The darkness outside is total, a velvet-lined anonymity, and the hum of the train is the only voice left in the world. guiding you deeper into the gilded silence of the interior. The deep night remains your primary landscape. But while the suites and corridors are held in a state of curated silence, somewhere in the center of this palace, there is a controlled, industrial hustle. You decide to drift toward the dining car, not for a meal, but to witness the mechanics of nourishment. As you move, you pass through the kitchen car. In the modern fleet, this is often a twin unit, an engineering partner to the 42-seat dining car. Historically, these kitchens have been described as not being large enough to swing a leopard in. And yet, the standard of food they produce defies the logic of their square footage. Imagine the environment behind that swinging door. While you enjoy the climate-controlled hush of your suite, the chefs here work in temperatures that can escalate to 50 degrees Celsius. The spatial planning is microscopic. Every inch of wall space is utilized for storage, from logo-marked china to extra-heavy silver-plated flatware. There is even a dedicated wine closet and hidden compartments beneath the floorboards for the storage of Constantia Chardonnay and award-winning Cape cultivars. The logistics are as precise as the bogie suspension. Perishable foods arrive in watertight containers, packed in ice, but the standard for freshness is absolute. Historically, meat grinding for the 5-course dinners was performed exactly 1 hour before departure, not a minute sooner, as that would suggest a lack of culinary discipline. This brings us to a rather intriguing and slightly indulgent historical concept: the unusual pleasure of the delay. On almost any other form of transport, a 2-hour delay is a catastrophe. But on the Blue Train, passengers have been known to receive news of a delay with a sense of unanticipated gluttony. Because time on board is measured exclusively by the announcement of meals, a delay simply represents a further opportunity for unanticipated hot snacks. It is as if the journey is a perpetual Christmas day, where the usual rules of moderation have been suspended by the railway authorities. You find yourself half hoping for a technical hitch, just to see what the chefs might conjure from their cramped, sapphire blue laboratory. You take a seat in the empty dining car. The chandeliers reflect in the windows, their ellipses tracing arcs over the moonlit Karoo dust. The tables are set for the morning service, the silverware aligned with mathematical certainty. You think of the 1933 Proti dining saloon, the mechanical ancestor of this room. In that era, the kitchen car was a separate entity, its design so revolutionary that it included the Watson bogies we discussed earlier. Engineering was not just about the ride, it was about the integrity of the sauce. An obscure technical detail surfaces: the auxiliary generators. Beneath the floorboards of the kitchen car, there are dedicated diesel engines and 150 kVA generators, specifically designed to provide independent power for the refrigerators, the ovens, and the massive air conditioning units. Even if the locomotive were to be detached, the ice would remain ice, and the Karoo lamb would remain perfectly chilled. Luxury, you realize, is simply the refusal to let the outside world affect the temperature of the butter. The menu for the morning begins to take shape in your mind. Salmon tartare with caviar, pink and juicy lamb racks, and chocolate cheesecake that caught your eye in the lounge earlier. Each dish is a layer in the insulation of the traveler. It is a sensory buffer, a way to ensure that as you traverse the most unequal landscapes of the continent, you remain cocooned in a 5-star Irish linen dream. A steward passes you, heading toward the personnel car. His uniform is spotless, his posture horizontal to the horizon. He offers a restrained nod, acknowledging your status as a midnight observer. Historically, it was considered gauche to praise a meal too extravagantly during the service. High society assumed that world-class cuisine was a basic right of the ticket holder. You maintain your silence, listening to the steady, mechanical syllable of the traction rods beneath you. It is time to return to the suite. You walk back through the kitchen vestibule, feeling the faint diagonal negotiation of the transverse dampers against a gentle crosswind. The chandeliers dim further, and the scent of roasted meat yields once more to the scent of beeswax and pressed cotton. You are a ghost in a machine that has mastered the choreography of indulgence. You sit on the edge of your bed, feeling the moderated percussion of 100 years of history. The Karoo continues its pale, unadorned insistence beyond the glass, but here, in the gilded silence, the night is steady, the liquid is level, and you are drifting steadily deeper into the interior. You are watching the horizon reconsider itself. The pale austerity of the Karoo desert, that landscape of chalk and eons, has begun, almost reluctantly, to give way to distant contours that rise in a faint, blue suggestion. What was earlier a flat insistence of dust now hints at elevation. The shrubs, which for the last 100 miles have observed such a strict diplomatic distance, now begin to cluster, as if negotiating their return to a more hospitable world. Inside your suite, nothing concedes. The chandeliers maintain their warm, elliptical defiance, and the 100% percale cotton on your bed holds its faint occupancy crease with the same discipline as a map. You stand by the window, feeling the moderated percussion beneath your feet. The train is no longer just tracing a straight line through the void. It is beginning to lean. This leads us to an obscure and highly reassuring technical detail: the intercar gangway stabilizers. As the train transitions from the flat interior to the gradual inclines of the Cape Fold belt, the movement between carriages could, in a lesser conveyance, become a source of unseemly noise. But here, the gangways are semi-floating assemblies mounted on pivots, coupled with flexible diaphragms and anti-sway bars. These stabilizers limit the relative motion between the sapphire blue units, ensuring that the corridor remains a straight, unwavering promise, even as the track begins to snake. Engineering, you realize, is the art of keeping a promise, even when the earth is turning. You feel the traction motors deepen their hum. You are approaching the Hex River Mountains, a mountain range that reaches 2,200 meters into the sky. The peaks appear as rugged, charcoal silhouettes, absorbing the maritime light that has begun to thread through the dry, high-veld air. This brings us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote: the etiquette of the approaching landmark. In the 1920s and 30s, it was considered remarkably gauche to name a landmark before it was fully visible. To point at a distant shadow and declare it Table Mountain was seen as a sign of provincial impatience, a lack of respect for the train's own timeline. One was expected to wait for the geography to formally introduce itself. You, being a passenger of breeding, observe the rising slopes with a measured, silent neutrality. The train enters the first of the tunnels. The world beyond the glass vanishes into a sudden, absolute black. Inside, the reflection of the wood paneling becomes your only reality. You sense the redistribution of weight as you descend toward the valleys. An obscure technical mechanism surfaces in your mind. The load-sensing proportioning valve. This valve is integrated within the air suspension system, and it is currently laboring with microscopic precision. It senses the subtle shifts in the carriage's mass, perhaps as the steward moves through the corridor or as the luggage is shifted for the final descent, and it adjusts the damping force accordingly. It is a system designed to anticipate your comfort before you even recognize a change in the grade. You decide to return to the lounge car for one final observation. The carpet, that loyal campaign against sound, swallows your footsteps once more. You pass a steward who is inquiring about your packing arrangements. Historically, it was considered a minor breach of decorum to begin packing before the final whistle. To be seen with a suitcase while still in motion was to suggest an eagerness to depart, rather than a gratitude for the journey. You assure him that your belongings remain respectfully arranged, and you take a seat near the panoramic window at the rear. The Hex River Valley opens up beneath you, a lush, green oasis of winelands that feels like a miracle after the bleached severity of the desert. The rows of vines appear in geometric obedience, stretching toward the feet of the mountains. The light here has changed. It carries a saline clarity, a suggestion of the Atlantic that is now less than 100 miles away. And then it happens. Table Mountain begins to separate from the sky. It is an indifference that feels architectural. The flat summit, the tablecloth of cloud that often drapes over its edges, hovers above the darker slopes of the coast. Historically, it was advised that one should never praise a view too extravagantly upon first sight, as enthusiasm risked a lack of composure. You confine your admiration to a measured, nearly inaudible, remarkable. The hum of the train softens. The braking effort increases imperceptibly. A restrained negotiation with gravity moderated by the load-sensing valves. You do not lurch. You do not sway. You simply glide. You think of the millions of ghosts who have watched this same mountain resolve itself through these same windows. 1923, 1937, 1946. Each era has brought its own silence to this arrival. You are an integrated component of the machine now, a ghost in a sapphire shell, tracing a deliberate descent toward the mother city. The final stretch of rail carries you past the clustered, angular buildings of the outskirts. The blue enamel reflects the coastal sun in subdued arcs, and the air inside remains temperate, filtered, and entirely unruffled. You sit upright, posture untroubled, as the carriage guides you toward the waiting platforms, into the final, gilded silence of the journey's end. You are now descending into the maritime air of the coast. But the story of the blue train does not end at the platform of the mother city. While the journey from Pretoria remains the spine of the service, we must now consider the expansion of the dream. In 1997 and 1998, the Palace on Wheels decided to test the limits of its own exclusivity by reaching into the wilder frontier of the southern coast and the mist-shrouded gorge of Victoria Falls. You imagine the train transitioning onto the Garden Route, that 500-kilometer stretch of coastline that links Cape Town to Etiquette, a name that, for the uninitiated, represents a formidable linguistic obstacle. Here, the pale austerity of the Karoo is replaced by the assertive, dark green of the ancient forests. The soil is no longer chalky and brittle. It is rich, damp, and heavy with the scent of pine and salt spray. Take a moment to consider the technical foundation of this entire journey. The Cape Gauge. Most of the world's prestigious trains run on standard gauge, an inheritance of British industrialism measuring 1,435 millimeters. But the Blue Train, as you feel it lean into a coastal curve now, is performing its magic on a much narrower path. The Cape Gauge measures exactly 1,067 millimeters, or 3 feet, 6 inches. It is a narrow and historically temperamental arrangement of steel. It was originally chosen by the colonial authorities in the 19th century as a cost-saving measure, a way to navigate the rugged African interior without the massive earthworks required for wider tracks. However, this narrowness presented a profound engineering challenge for a luxury service. A narrower track means a higher risk of lateral sway and a greater sensitivity to weight distribution. You are riding on a technical miracle. The Watson bogies we discussed, with their helical coil springs and secondary air bellows, were engineered specifically to compensate for this narrow foundation. Engineering, you realize, is the art of building a palace upon a very thin line. This brings us to a rather intriguing and slightly somber historical concept: the paradox of the Sapphire name. For you, and for the presidents and kings who have preceded you, the Blue Train is a name that represents the absolute pinnacle of global luxury travel. It is a sanctuary of Irish linen and gold-tiled bathtubs. However, if you were to walk into the townships that hug the tracks, you might find that the name carries a very different and far more dangerous meaning. In South African slang, the Blue Train, or vlam, is the name given to the methylated spirits consumed by those in the deepest grasp of poverty. Because the spirit is dyed blue to signify its toxicity, the desperate act of drinking it is known colloquially as riding the Blue Train. This linguistic duality, the five-star hotel on wheels gliding past the one-way train of death, is a startling window into the soul of the country. It is a reminder that you are a ghost in a machine that carries more than just passengers. It carries a century of political and social transformation, gliding beneath the surface of a sapphire blue dream. You sit upright, posture untroubled, and you observe this contrast with a measured, respectful silence. The train gathers confidence as it approaches the final coastal grade. You think back to the year 1925, the era of mighty old steam steeds. On August the 13th of that year, an engine known simply as number 860 created a world record. It hauled the Union Limited from Johannesburg to Cape Town, single-handed, covering 956 miles in exactly 29 hours. In an era of coal dust and pistons, that was a performance of sublime power. It proved that the African interior could not only be crossed, but conquered by the rhythm of steel. Today, that record is merely a footnote in a journey that prefers meandering to conquest. The blue train no longer rushes. It lingers, as if it knows that the most precious resource on board is the time you spend doing absolutely nothing. A steward passes through the corridor, his white-gloved nod acknowledging your status as a midnight observer. He mentions the iconic parting memento, a small, sapphire blue gift that guests receive upon arrival. This leads us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote. The etiquette of the memento. In the 1930s, it was considered a minor breach of character to inquire about gifts before the final stop. To do so suggested a lack of gratitude for the journey itself, as if the physical objects were more valuable than the experience of the gilded silence. You, of course, remain silent on the matter, listening only to the steady, mechanical syllable of the traction rods. You return to your suite. The room is exactly as you left it. The honeyed wood glows in the dark, and the scent of beeswax and pressed linen remains, a constant, reassuring aroma. You sit on the edge of the bed, feeling the moderated percussion beneath the floorboards. Through the window, the coastline begins to reveal itself in flashes of maritime silver. The air inside remains temperate, filtered, and entirely unruffled by the rising humidity of the coast. The secondary suspension bellows are whispering to the coastal sand, promising that your horizontality will be preserved as the carriage guides you toward the higher contours of the journey's end. You lean back against the pillows. The 100% percale cotton is cool against your skin. The night is steady. The liquid is level. And you are drifting steadily deeper into the interior. You are resting now, held in the steady, engineered embrace of the deep night. The maritime silver of the coast remains a distant promise, and the pale vastness of the Karoo continues to unspool beyond your window. But as you lie there, feeling the micro-negotiations of the secondary air bellows, it occurs to you that this Sapphire Palace did not simply appear on the rails as a finished thought. It is the culmination of a century-old obsession, a dream of tempered steel that once aimed to bridge an entire continent. Tonight, we are drifting further back than 1923. We are drifting toward the era of the dreamers, and the man who wanted to paint the map red. Take a moment to consider the name Cecil John Rhodes. In the 1880s and 90s, Rhodes built an empire on the diamond fields of Kimberley, but his true ambition was horizontal. He envisioned a trans-African railway, a singular thread of steel that would link Cape Town in the south to Cairo in the north. His dream was to create a ribbon of civilization that would bypass the awe-inspiring mountain ranges, the untamed savannas, and the arid deserts that we are crossing tonight. While the full continental link was never completed, stopping eventually at the mist-shrouded gorge of the Zambezi River, the South African segment became the most sophisticated rail corridor in the world. It was born from diamonds and gold, but it was refined through the discipline of the technical drawing. This leads us to a truly yawn-worthy technical milestone, the patent of 1844. Long before the blue train carried its first dignitary, an engineer named Joseph Wright obtained a very wide patent, number 10,173. His patent detailed improvements in railway carriages, specifically the use of 4, 6, and 8-wheeled bogies. These ideas were absolutely revolutionary, and in many respects, they were 50 years ahead of actual practice. You are currently benefiting from the ancestral logic of that 1844 blueprint. Every time the train rounds a curve without unsettling your crystal, you are hearing the distant echo of a 19th century mechanical revolution. You decide to adjust your position. The 100% percale cotton is smooth and cool, a high thread count defiance against the historical reality of the luxury precursors. Before the Union Limited, there was the Imperial Mail and the African Express. These were the trains of the 1890s, the first machines to offer oak-paneled dining saloons, card rooms, and electric lighting. For the fortune seekers and mining magnates of the era, stepping onto the Imperial Mail at Table Bay was a transition from the rough reality of a 17-day ocean voyage to a world of champagne service and polished brass. This brings us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote: the etiquette of ambition. In the late 1800s, it was considered a minor breach of character for a passenger to discuss his mining claims or business ventures in the dining car. To talk of money, even on a train built entirely on the proceeds of gold, was seen as a sign of industrial anxiety. One was expected to discuss the weather, the quality of the claret, or the technical properties of oak paneling. You maintain a posture of genteel indifference, listening only to the steady, mechanical syllable of the wheels. You think of the Zambezi Express, the train that carried the dream further north, toward the thundering Victoria Falls. By the turn of the century, the Zambezi Express was on par with the Imperial Mail for comfort. It offered a moving 5-star hotel experience, where the sound of the falls would eventually replace the sound of the steam-powered chugging of the locomotive. You imagine the early travelers in 1928, when the first articulated coaches were introduced. These coaches were equipped with revolutionary amenities: heating, bunk lights, and bells for summoning the attendant. Before then, if you required a glass of water in the middle of the night, it was a matter of stoic endurance. Now, luxury was becoming automated. A series of copper wires and brass bells that ensured you never had to leave your sanctuary. Inside your suite, the auxiliary generators are humming beneath the floorboards, providing a 150 kilovolt ampere kVA reassurance that your air conditioning and your refrigerated Karoo lamb will remain undisturbed. A steward passes through the corridor. His footsteps are swallowed by the thick blue carpet, that architecture of silence that Metro Camel perfected in 1937. You recall that these carriages were built at Washwood Heath in Birmingham, a place of industrial grit that exported hygienic modernity to the rest of the world. The rivets in your suite walls are a legacy of that Birmingham craftsmanship. They are satisfied with their own symmetry, standing guard over a century of political and social transformation. You are a ghost in a machine that carries the weight of an empire's dream, but you are a comfortable ghost. You are insulated from the multiplicity of insects and the smut and cinders that plagued the travelers of 1890. Through the window, the stars of the southern hemisphere continue their slow, astronomical meeting. The land is total silence, a velvet-lined anonymity, and the hum of the train is the only voice left in the world. It is a modern syllable, repeated without flourish, guiding you deeper into the gilded silence of the interior. You lean back, feeling the primary coil springs and the secondary air bellows performing their quiet diplomacy between steel and rail. The night is steady, the liquid is level, and you are drifting steadily deeper into the interior. We shift our focus now to the year 1972. It was the year the blue train was, in a sense, reborn. While the 1937 steel carriages had established the sapphire blue identity, by the early 70s, the march of technology required a new, more profound statement of luxury. This led to the creation of the second-generation sets, constructed largely by South Africans at the Union Carriage and Wagon Works, in a town called Nigel. Imagine the pride in that workshop. The goal was not merely to build a train, but to produce a machine of a standard of luxury and quality equal to the best in the world. To achieve this, the Nigel engineers reached across the oceans, incorporating the latest railway technology from both Britain and Germany. You are currently benefiting from that international collaboration. The bogies beneath you carry the ghost of German precision, and the soundproofing in your suite walls is a legacy of British industrial silence. As you lie there, feeling the secondary air bellows performing their invisible diplomacy, you recognize that you are resting in a machine that took millions of hours to perfect. This leads us to our next yawn-worthy historical concept: the social etiquette of the afternoon nap. In the era of the second generation, the afternoon doze became a formal pillar of the journey. It was considered a sign of a truly refined traveler to recognize that the scenery of the Highveld, however spectacular, eventually required a period of internal processing. The protocol was simple. One did not simply lie down. One requested the assistance of a butler. You think of your own butler, a man who understands that his primary role is to act as a magician of the upholstery. With a few practiced, rhythmic movements, he adapts the sofas of your suite into a nighttime sanctuary of 100% percale cotton and goose-down duvets. The transformation is so smooth, so entirely lacking in drama, that you begin to wonder if the beds were always there, merely waiting for the butler to reveal them to the world. You settle into the fabric, acknowledging that on this train, even rest is a choreographed event. Inside your suite, the air remains a constant, regulated calm. However, there is a small and rather dryly amusing technical curiosity regarding the climate control on board. Historians and frequent travelers have often noted a specific irony. To turn the temperature down in certain carriages, one occasionally had to turn the dial on the control panel up. It was an odd, small oversight, a mechanical riddle that stood in sharp contrast to the perfection of the gold-tiled bathtub. You imagine the over-ironed academics of 1972 squinting at the dials, wondering if they were negotiating with a machine or a philosopher. You adjust your own settings with a measured, experimental touch, and you listen to the restrained hum of the ventilation. The train continues its unhurried negotiation with the Plateau. We have left the era of Cecil John Rhodes and the imperial mail behind, and we are moving through the heart of the modern dream. In 1997, The traditional route was extended northwards to the thundering Victoria Falls. A second, identical train was introduced in 1998, allowing the Palace on Wheels to reach into the western edge of the Kruger National Park and the eastern end of the Garden Route. The dream has expanded, but the silence remains the same. Whether you are crossing the Limpopo province in search of Africa's Big Five, or gliding through the vineyards of the Cape, you are always insulated by the same blue enamel sheathing. You are always a ghost in a palace that refuses to lurch. A steward passes through the corridor. The sound of his footsteps is swallowed by the blue carpet, that architecture of silence we discussed. He is carrying a tray of restorative tea for the lounge car, where other passengers are wisely partaking before the next round of drinks begins. Historically, it was considered gauche to appear too weary or dazed during the afternoon service. One was expected to maintain a posture of languid alertness. You, however, choose to remain in your suite, feeling the primary coil springs absorbing the vertical irregularities of the desert rail. Through the window, the Karoo continues its unadorned, pale insistence. The soil is brighter now, the textures sharper under the full afternoon sun. But inside, the chandeliers cast warm ellipses that deny the severity of the exterior. The secondary suspension bellows are whispering to the high-veld dust, promising that the afternoon will remain horizontal. And you are drifting steadily deeper into the interior. The air has changed again. You sense it before you see any evidence beyond the glass. The dry, heated breath of the interior plateau has begun to yield to something cooler, something with a faint, saline weight. You are approaching the edge of the continent. The pale austerity of the Karoo, that landscape of chalk and eons, has finally surrendered to the green, mountainous descent of the Western Cape. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere remains unwavering. The 100% percale cotton on your bed is cool against your skin, and the honeyed wood paneling holds the afternoon light with its customary, disciplined glow. You stand by the panoramic window, watching the world transition from the mineral to the maritime. This leads us to our next technical footnote: the load-sensing proportioning valve. As the train enters the first of the tunnels in the Hex River Mountains, you sense a redistribution of weight. This valve, integrated deep within the air suspension system, is currently laboring with microscopic precision. It is a mechanical brain that monitors the total mass of the carriage. As passengers' preparation for arrival, as luggage is shifted, and as the braking effort increases for the descent, the valve adjusts the damping force in real time. It is a system designed to ensure that you do not lurch, but that you arrive. Engineering, you realize, is simply the art of keeping a promise, even when gravity is pulling you toward the sea. You think of the millions of ghosts who have stood exactly where you are standing, watching this same transition. 1923, optimism. 1937, confidence. 1946, re-emergence. Each era has looked through these gold-tinted picture windows, searching for the first sign of the coast. And then, the slow reveal begins. Taboo Mountain begins to separate from the sky. It is not a dramatic arrival. It is an indifference that feels architectural. The flat summit, often draped in the tablecloth of cloud, hovers above the darker slopes of the coast like a crown waiting for its owners. Historically, it was advised in early railway guides that one should never praise a view too extravagantly upon first sight. Enthusiasm was seen as a lack of composure, a sign of provincial curiosity. You obey the code of the refined ghost, offering only a measured, nearly inaudible, remarkable. The train gathers confidence as it glides through the glorious winelands of the Hex River Valley. The rows of vines appear in geometric obedience, stretching toward the feet of the mountains. The light carries a maritime clarity now, a suggestion of the Atlantic that is now less than 100 miles away. A steward passes through the corridor, his white-gloved nod acknowledging your status as a final observer. He mentions the iconic parting memento, a small, sapphire blue gift that guests receive upon arrival. This brings us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote. The etiquette of the memento. In the 1930s, it was considered a minor breach of character to inquire about gifts before the final stop. To do so suggested a lack of gratitude for the journey itself, as if the physical objects were more valuable than the experience of the gilded silence. You remain appropriately silent, listening only to the steady, mechanical syllable of the wheels. The panoramic windows of the lounge now frame a world that is returning to itself. The lush winelands of the Hex River Valley are yielding to the industrial geometry of the outskirts, and the air inside the carriage carries a faint, saline weight. You are aware that the mother city is near, not because you see the skyscrapers, but because the light has achieved a maritime clarity that is entirely distinct from the bleached austerity of the Karoo. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere remains a curated argument against the gritty urban commotion beyond the glass. You stand for a moment in the corridor, feeling the braking effort increase. It is a restrained, persistent negotiation with gravity. This leads us to our next technical footnote: the load-sensing proportioning valve. As the train prepares for the final stop at Cape Town Central, this valve is laboring deep within the air suspension system. It is a mechanical brain that monitors the total mass of the carriage in real time. As you and your fellow ghosts move toward the vestibules, and as the butlers shift the luggage for disembarkation, the valve adjusts the damping force accordingly. It ensures that the transition from 90 kilometers per hour to a complete standstill is achieved with such a lack of drama that the crystal in the lounge remains convincingly still. Historically, it was considered a sign of provincial impatience to begin packing your belongings before the final whistle had sounded. To be seen with a suitcase while the train was still in motion was to admit a certain eagerness to depart, a lack of respect for the journey itself. You, however, remain appropriately unhurried, your belongings respectfully arranged within the honey-colored timber marquetry of your suite. You look through the glass at the passing scenery. You see the tin shacks that hug the tracks, cube-shaped homes that stand in sharp, pedagogical contrast to the gold-tiled sanctuary you have occupied for the last 1,000 miles. It is a startling glimpse into a country that Joseph Lelyveld once described as compartmentalized on or off the rails. You see giddy children waving as the sapphire blue flank of the train joggers past, and you realize that you are part of a century of political and social transformation, gliding beneath the surface of a blue enamel dream. The train leans into its final curve, The inner car gangway stabilizers, those semi-floating assemblies we discussed, ensure that the corridor remains a straight, unwavering promise, even as the track enters the station limits. You feel the air pressure shift as you pass the terminal buildings. The hydraulic dampers do their work without applause, quelling the last minor lateral suggestion of the rail. This brings us to our next yawn-worthy historical footnote: the etiquette of the final platform. In the 1920s, it was considered a minor breach of character to appear too exuberant or enthusiastic upon arrival. One was expected to disembark with a stoic posture, acknowledging the porters and butlers with a restrained nod that suggested that five-star luxury was not a novelty, but a baseline expectation. You imagine yourself stepping onto the blue carpet, greeted by name by butlers in white gloves, and you maintain a posture of genteel indifference. The hum of the traction motors softens into a whisper. The carriage glides past the final signals, its blue surfaces catching the afternoon sun in subdued arcs. Table Mountain is no longer a distant outline. It is an architectural indifference that dominates the view, its flat summit draped in a tablecloth of cloud. You return to your seat. The 100% percale cotton is smooth and cool, and the secondary suspension bellows are whispering their final negotiations to the coastal sand. You are an integrated component of the machine now, a ghost in a palace of steel, and you are drifting steadily deeper into the interior. And now, the palace is still. The blue carpet is under your feet, and the maritime air is cool against your skin. But you are not leaving the journey. You are taking the gilded silence with you into the deeper currents of your own rest. The secondary air bellows have finished their negotiations. The primary coil springs are at ease, and the ancient rock of the Magaliesberg remains behind you, unbothered by time. Close your eyes now. Imagine the sapphire blue enamel receding into the dark. The rivets are satisfied with their symmetry. The percale cotton is smooth, and there is nothing left to do but drift. I genuinely enjoy what I do here, exploring these yawn-worthy corners of the past with you. If you are still awake, please post your location and local time in the comments. It is our global ritual for those who watch the world through the glass of history. Until the next time we drift through the currents of the past, sleep well.